Hello everyone, Pastor Dean, Pastor Nancy and Kelsey. I hope you all are well. In today's video, I'm going to be giving a sermon for my apologetics class, and I'm going to be discussing the Nephilim because they've got a weirdly special place in my heart. I even went to Peru a few years ago to check out evidence of them. Those weird elongated skulls that Eli Marzulli, who's an author and researcher, did DNA testing on back in 2016, and who discovered that they have mitochondria, which are organelles inside cells, unknown in any humans, animals and primates on Earth. So that's very interesting, or as the Spanish say, muy interesante. I'll show you my photos of them before we continue with this sermon so you can see exactly what I'm talking about. So here they are. This little fellow here is apparently an 18-month-old child, and as you can see, they've got very large heads. Their heads are 25 to 40% larger than human heads. Their eye sockets are 2 to 3 times larger. The suture lines are different. Like on regular human skulls, we have 2 parietal lobes, whereas on these skulls, they've got 1 enormous skull cap. They've also got very large necks to hold their very large heads, and the location is different, which shows that these are genetically different. It's proposed that these cone heads are the result of cradle boarding, which is a barbaric practice of you attach boards to the infant skull, the child's skull, to shape the way it grows as they develop. But as Eli Marzulli points out, while you can create cone heads using this practice, you can increase the volume of the skull, so that doesn't make any sense. And furthermore, they've also discovered feti in utero with elongated skulls. So again, that proves that it's not the result of cradle boarding. It's noted that apologetics means to give an answer for or a defense for our faith. Apology is a Greek word. And in my opinion, the evidence for the Nephilim is mind-blowing. It literally blew my mind, and it massively piqued my interest in the Bible. As I mentioned in my testimony, when I discovered this part of his story, I realised that the Bible is absolutely true. I had never heard about the Nephilim in church before, but I had heard about them through New Age conspiracy theorists like David Icke, who's renowned for saying that the Queen is a shape-shifting reptilian. And whilst this is arguably far out, it's actually not that far out when you realise that his theory in part comes from the Bible, which tells us about these 2 bloodlines, one human and one less than human. So respectively, we can start with Genesis 3:15, which tells us about these two bloodlines. It's noted at this point in time that Adam and Eve had sinned against God and had munched the forbidden fruit, and everything changed as death entered creation. As John Milton infamously encapsulates, earth became paradise lost. God in turn dished out punishments for both the man and the woman, and also the serpent for their transgressions. Like he said to the serpent, "Because you have done this, cursed are you above all livestock and all wild animals. You will crawl on your belly, and you will eat the dust all the days of your life." So it seems the serpent, who was an otherwise cunning beast, lost his legs and became a snake, arguably. In the Haggadah, an ancient Jewish text, the serpent is described as tall like a camel, but 2-legged and walked like a man. In the original Hebrew, the word serpent means something shining and beautiful, which is similar in meaning to Lucifer, which is a reference to light. Lucifer means light bearer, just as Christopher means Christ bearer. So after God punishes them, he says to the serpent, "And I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel." Thus, according to God's word, there's a seed war. As Steve Quayle, a researcher and author who's done extensive research into the Nephilim, states, this verse is the Rosetta Stone of the Bible. It's also noted that the woman's seed is the first reference to their virgin birth, and also it's the first reference to there being a redeemer, which is Jesus. So all parties were duly punished and went on their way. Adam and Eve then went on to have 2 sons, namely Cain and Abel, but Cain killed his brother Abel, which highlights the wickedness of human nature from the beginning. But they went on to have Seth, and they had other sons and daughters, and the human population began to grow rapidly on earth. And this brings us up to Genesis 6, which is the central text of Nephilim in the Bible. So Genesis 6, verses 1 through 4 tells us, "And it came to pass, when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God saw that the daughters of men that they were fair, and they took them wives of all of which they chose. And the Lord said, My spirit shall not always strive with man, for that he also is flesh. Yet his days will be 120 years. There were Nephilim, or giants, on the earth in those days, and also afterwards, when the sons of God came unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them. The same became mighty men which were of old, men of renown. Nephilim is Hebrew for earthborn, and it comes from the word nephal, which means to fall. But furthermore, the Nephilim were giants, and we hear stories about the giants throughout the Bible. Like we hear they're as tall as cedar trees, and they have double rows of teeth, and they have 6 fingers and 6 toes, and regular people feel like grasshoppers in their sight. But probably the most renowned story or beloved story is that of David and Goliath. David, who became King David, took out giant Goliath when he was just a boy. He killed him. The last giant that we hear about in the Bible is King Og of Bashan. Og's bed was apparently 13.5 feet long, and it was 6 feet wide, and it's believed that he was 11 or 12 feet tall. Whilst there's loads of evidence, like their bones and also their architecture, like megalithic stones and so forth, there's also been a massive cover-up. Since the early 1900s, Western archaeological institutions, which includes the National Geographic and the Smithsonian Institute, have quashed any trace of giants. Steve Quayle states actually that the Smithsonian Institute was specifically founded with the task of destroying evidence of giants, and he states that they admitted to destroying tens of thousands of giant human remains in the early 1900s. They were ordered to be destroyed from high-level administration to protect the mainstream chronology of evolution at the time. He speaks about a former Smithsonian employee who turned in a whistleblower. They were a high-level curator, and they stole a human femur bone that was 1.3 meters long in the mid-1930s, which the guy kept hidden and kept for all his life. And it wasn't until he was on his deathbed that he admitted to the cover-up operations of the Smithsonian Institute. It's highlighted that news about the giants began to dry up in the 1950s, and it was at that time that we began to get ambushed with alien propaganda. Hiding the evidence of giants basically eliminates the evidence for the biblical narrative, and so it's understood that the agenda is to promote evolution and to belie creation. As George Orwell said in 1984, he who controls the past controls the future, and he who controls the present controls the past. Steve Quayle concedes, he states, that the biggest cover-up of history is the cover-up of history. However, before we continue with the Nephilim or giants, it seems pertinent to clarify that there's 2 theories regarding the sons of God who mated with the daughters of men. So there's the angel theory and there's the Sethite theory. And I'm of the opinion and advocate that the angel theory is the one that makes the most sense. So in the Bible, sons of God refers to angels. Like in the book of Job, we're told that the sons of God, the angels, rejoiced at creation. But it's also understood that Adam is a son of God because he was God's son. But Adam's offspring, the whole of humankind, are Adam's sons and daughters. Adam is the biological father of humankind. Adam actually means mankind. So we're the sons and daughters of men and women. We're not the sons and daughters of God until we're born again of the Holy Spirit. When we're born or adopted into God's family and we become Christians. So the angel theory is the understanding that fallen angels or fallen sons of God mated with daughters of men and they produced these giants. And it's understood that these fallen angels could have shapeshifted into men because they have this changeling capacity, or they could have materialized their seraphim bodies and presented themselves as serpent gods, which is interesting because when we look at the ancient world, like in China, in South America, Latin America, in the Indus Valley, we can see evidence of people worshipping serpent gods, so that makes sense. We also know when angels came to Lot, when they were going to tell Lot and his family to get out of Sodom because it was going to be destroyed, the men from the city came out and demanded that the angels who looked like men come out so they could have sex with them. So you can clearly have sex with them somehow. Alternatively, the Sethite view states that the sons of God are Seth's sons. So rather than fallen angels having sex with women, it's the idea that Seth's faithful sons had sex with Cain's evil daughters and they produced the Nephilim, which makes absolutely no sense because it doesn't matter how evil people are. They don't produce giants. There's been wicked people forever and they don't produce giant kids. This view, which surfaced in the 5th century, then became the orthodox view, despite the nonsense. And apparently the early church and the early rabbinical teachings taught the angel view, and it wasn't until the advent of the precarious, aka haunted, Roman Catholic Church that the Sethite view became the mainstream, or rather lamestream, view. It also seems pertinent to note the Book of Enoch, which was found with the Dead Sea Scrolls in the mid-20th century, because this corroborates with Genesis 6. The Book of Enoch, also in chapter 6, tells us the same story. It tells us about fallen angels who mated with the daughters of men, who sinned with the daughters of men, and they fathered Nephilim. In the book of Daniel, we're told about watchers. So watchers are a class of angel. So it states, and it came to pass, when the children of men had multiplied, that in those days were born unto them beautiful and comely daughters. And the angels, the children of heaven, saw and lusted after them, and said to one another, Come, let us choose us wives from among the children of men, and beget us children. So 200 watcher class angels descended on Mount Hermon, and did the deed by sowing their seed. In the Bible, in Jude chapter 1 verse 6, we're told about angels who kept not their first estate, but left their habitation. So it's understood that they left the second heaven to come to our heaven, to come to the first heaven, which is earth. But it's also understood that their bodies physically changed, as habitation also means body. So they left their clothes of heaven. It's possible that their bodies changed from spiritual to physical, to enable them to procreate. It's possibly how it worked. The Nephilim were a violation of creation, and they had a ruinous effect on humankind. In short, God's creation became vile. We're told God was sorry he ever created mankind, and it broke his heart. Wickedness was everywhere, and humankind only thought wicked thoughts all the time. So God decided to drown the world, and thus the great flood landed. God would wipe the slate clean, and he would recommence the human family with his trusty servant Noah's 3 children. As it transpired, however, the Nephilim returned, and the demons, the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim, also came to torment us. So that's how that worked out. And it also seems, it's understood that the demonic spirits are now being repackaged as aliens, but I don't have time to go into all that, but that's also very interesting. Okay, that's me done about the Nephilims. I hope you enjoyed this little sermon. Okay, cheers, shalom.